Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and this acrylic painting tutorial is going to show you how to paint Surfboard Beach on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. Let's go over the brushes and colors for this painting. So we have a 3/4 inch flat wash, a 12 bright, and a number 4 round brush. And I also used a 3/8 inch angle brush, which is optional, but I did find the angle brush helpful for the palm fronds. You're going to need a ruler and painter's tape. I also used a plain white piece of chalk to draw the surfboards, and let's go over the colors. I used Mars Black, these are the Liquitex Basics colors, Titanium White, Hooker's Green Hue Permanent, Naples Yellow, Alizarin Crimson Hue, Light Blue Violet, Burnt Sienna, Primary Yellow. I used Turquoise Blue and Deep Violet. Some of these colors can also be switched out if you're customizing the colors of your surfboard. So 10 colors for this painting. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, I'm working on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. However, this design can work on any size. You just have to kind of adjust the measurements accordingly. So I'm going to place my horizon line for this at the 3-inch mark from the top of the canvas. So measure 3 inches down. And so I just made like little marks with my pencil, measured that, and then I'm going to use painter's tape to mark this line. And so this line, everything above this line will be the really pretty light blue sky, and everything below this line, not everything below this line, but a little bit below this line, will be the pretty turquoise water. So this is going to help us get started with this beach scene. And I'm going to load my palette with light blue violet and titanium white. So if you don't have light blue violet, you can use any light blue that you have available. This color only shows up in the sky of this painting, a little bit in the water, but most of the sky, and titanium white. So we'll be using our 3/4 flat. So let's go ahead and load our 3/4 inch flat wash brush in the water. And I like to kind of just tap it dry, but I don't want to dry it all the way. I'll use some of that water that's still on the bristles for the paint. Grab equal parts light blue violet and white. Mix that a little bit on your palette. A little bit of water on my brush helped kind of thin that paint out a bit. I like to do that with the first layer of the painting. Helps spread that paint and get that canvas covered. So we're going to do left and right strokes across the top part of the canvas. And we're going to work our way down. And when I do skies, I like to do sort of a gradient thing where the blue gets lighter as we get to the horizon line. So as I'm reloading my brush, I'm grabbing more titanium white and blending that up into the blue so it's gradually lighter. It doesn't turn all the way white at the horizon. It just turns to a much lighter version of the blue that's at the very top. And left and right, make sure that whole top part is covered, and we have our sky in the painting done. So go ahead and rinse, and we can lift our painter's tape and we can add turquoise blue to our palette. So I have a clean 3/4 flat brush, tapping that water out, and let's go ahead and do turquoise. I added a little bit of light blue violet in there because I still had a bunch of light blue violet on my palette. I didn't want to go to waste, so I mixed about equal parts light blue violet and turquoise together, and about equal parts white together. So it's going to make a lighter, kind of more blue, cool blue version of that turquoise. And let's measure about 2 inches down. So I'm taking my ruler and making little marks because I'm going to go about 2 inches down with this turquoise color. And I'm going to grab a little bit more white for the top because in this water, I want the water to be lighter, closer to the horizon, and a little bit darker, closer to the shore. So I'm actually adding a bit extra white to my brush, to the tip of the brush, and letting that be lighter at the top. So I'm just gonna be really careful not to let this go over the sky. If it does a little bit, it's not the end of the world. Try to get that line to be straight and then kind of blend it down. And then when we get kind of closer to the shore, I actually added a little bit of white in there too, knowing there's going to be some lighter color waves in that area. So it's almost like light, dark in the middle, and then light on the bottom, but it doesn't have to be blended all the way. So I'm not working that paint to let it be a gradient or anything. And a little bit more white right here. This line right here, I'm not super concerned about it being completely horizontal because that shore is going to be brought down and the waves are just going to kind of curve on the shore. But before we can do waves, we're going to need to paint the sand in next. So let's load our palette with burnt sienna. Let's wash our brush off and let's go ahead and mix a sand color on our palette. So we need a higher proportion of white to brown to make this look light. So about 4 parts white, maybe 1 part brown. And there was a little bit of turquoise on my brush still from rinsing it, and that's fine. That actually helps us a little bit. So if you want to add just a teeny tiny amount of turquoise into your sand, you're welcome to do that. I'm going to add even more white to this. So again, a lot of white. So get this all mixed. We can always go darker, but I want to start out with my lightest color because it's harder to go lighter than darker on the canvas. We can always add darker paint, but adding lighter paint gets harder. Anyway, we're going to start at the bottom. And this is kind of the lighter part of the sand, and it gets darker closer to the shore because the sand is kind of wet back there. So we don't have to do completely straight horizontal strokes. Let's make these kind of choppy. So our sand is not like completely flat. It's got some grooves and hills. And we're going to add shadowing later, but let's just fill this kind of bottom area, kind of medium choppy strokes. And then when I get closer to the shore, a little bit more than halfway up the sand area, I'm going to grab more of that burnt sienna so that I can get this sandy area to be darker. But we're not creating a perfect gradient where it blends perfectly from light to dark at the top. If we have darker at the bottom, that's okay. I'm just letting this kind of blend again, kind of angled strokes, sort of flat, but then can kind of blend it in a way where it's kind of going at an angle. Just bring some of this dark down here. So later on when we paint the fence and our surfboards, we can go and add darker texture as needed, but let's just focus on kind of filling this whole area up. So I'm going to add more white to my palette, more white to my brush, kind of fill this in again, short little choppy strokes. So right here, I'm not intentionally going darker. I'm just kind of using that lighter color to kind of fill up at maybe a little bit dark here. But I'm going to intentionally create kind of a different color of the sand that meets the water. So we're going to create a wet sand color here in just a second. For our wet sand color, let's add some turquoise intentionally this time to that brown. So I grabbed like a small little bit of turquoise and mixed it into that. Let's add a little bit more white to this to kind of lighten it up. Let's take this and bring this next to our water. So we will be painting like this seafoam white thing over the part where the blue and sand meet. This is like that shadowy wet sand area. So I kind of did like a little slither of that dark, but then I need to lighten that up so that I can blend that back down into the sand. So that's why I'm grabbing more white to help get that kind of dark sandy color to blend down. It doesn't have to be a perfect blend. It's going to look kind of greenish, and that's okay. If you need to grab your sandy color that you made on your palette to help get that to blend, you can. So we have kind of dark that touches the water, and then it quickly goes light and kind of blends down into the rest of the sand area. Keep in mind that dark part is going to be covered by this seafoam sort of wave layer layer in another step. So we got more of that sandy color. Trying to get that. There is a little slither of canvas kind of showing through, but that's okay. I'm just bringing this down gently into the rest of our light sandy area. And let's go ahead and let that layer dry. So I'm talking about the part where our water touches the sand. That needs to dry before we can do this step. So dry painting and come back and we're going to do this wave sort of seafoam layer. So I'm going to use a 12 bright brush for this, and we have some fresh titanium white on our palette. When you go to load your brush, only load a small amount of white right there on the tip of the brush. You don't need a lot of white. And let's just kind of gently sort of sketch this seafoamy layer. And as we're painting this, so this is the part where the blue meets the dark brown. And as you're painting this, you're kind of forming sort of this curve to define that shoreline. So mine kind of dips up in the middle and then curves down a little bit. And you're going to see some of that dark brown still below it. We can kind of bring that up over into the water area. So the thickness of that line kind of varies. It goes kind of thin in the middle and then a little bit thicker on the left and the right. It's about a ½ inch thick. And then we can start painting the waves. So when I do these waves, I'm loading a little bit more white right there on the tip of the brush. And I'm going to tap the brush to create this wave texture. So tap, and it creates this kind of a thick, bright white texture. And so some of that is going over that sea foam layer that we just painted, but some of it actually goes over the blue. So this is just at kind of the top of that sea foam layer. So that sea foam layer, that was like kind of thin and a little bit translucent. This is thick paint, opaque, not translucent, because we're adding a lot to our brush. And I'm tapping it kind of, you can also kind of like curve your strokes, kind of make it go into kind of a curved direction. So right here, as you're adding some of these smaller waves into your blue watery ocean area, you want to make sure that those are thinner and not as thick as the ones that are closer to the shore. That's going to create perspective in your ocean. So the ones further in the distance are a lot lighter, a lot smaller, thinner. The ones closest to the shore, thick, bigger. And you can do kind of a few bigger ones, but still make sure the bigger ones are kind of closer to the shore. Keep in mind that the ocean doesn't have to be perfect. We're not trying to paint super realistic waves. This is a part of the painting that's kind of in the distance. Focus is a little bit more on the surfboards in this. So if your ocean looks a little bit more abstract, that's okay. I'm going to add kind of bigger waves because that one kind of curves up, and then I'm going to do maybe a little bit more sea foam down here. So maybe this little bit of, maybe it's reflection on the sand or some lighter water kind of seeping in. But that's it for the ocean part. We can always go back later and add some more reflection if it's needed. But we're going to next focus on getting our fence painted in. I'm going to draw the rectangular area that is my fence, and I'm going to mark from the bottom of the canvas about 2.75 to 3 inches. So you can do 3 or 2.75, relatively that amount. It's about halfway between the shoreline and the bottom of the canvas. And then the width of the fence is about 8 inches, about 8.5 to 8 inches. So you can do 8.5 or 8. So this one goes a little bit further than halfway. And then the height of the fence, the height is going to vary a little when we paint it in because some of the bamboo is varying with heights. But let's do 3 inches high. So I marked 3 inches. So basically it is a 3 by 8.5 rectangle that I just drew on the canvas, and it's on the side. And next we're going to paint the bamboo fence in. So we need burnt sienna on our palette. You'll need some fresh black as well as Naples yellow, but let's just start with the brown and the black for now. We're going to load our 3/4 flat. I'm going to double load. So I'm going to load it in the brown and the black, but I'm not going to mix it all the way on my palette. You'll need a little bit more brown than black for this to show up. We want to create our first layer of the fence as this really dark brown layer. And I'm going to use my flat brush to drag each stroke up. So I'm starting from the bottom of that fence line and I'm dragging up. So the bottom part is relatively opaque, not see-through. Then I'm going to drag it up, and as I'm dragging up, I'm letting that paint sort of run out and run dry. And at the edge of that line, so each little stroke I'm making is going a little bit beyond that line that I drew to create that kind of edging at the top for the bamboo fence. And I'm letting my brown and black blend together on the canvas, but I'm not over blending it all the way. So I'm taking advantage of the fact that this black and brown are blending together, creating different variations of dark, dark brown. And we're already starting to get kind of this faux wood fence look. So each stroke, you want to make sure you're going vertical with each stroke. You want to make sure you're starting at the very bottom of the fence, and you want to make sure you're dragging it up and kind of releasing your brush as you get to that line. So I'm basically filling this entire rectangular area with this technique, letting brown and black blend. There's a variety of darkness and lightness. So sometimes when I do this stroke, that was kind of neat. It made like a little pattern of black, brown, but that's just how it was loaded on my brush. But we don't want to over blend it all the way to make it all one color. We want it to be multiple brown shades of brown and black. The fence is going to look like it's kind of floating right now because there's no shadow or sand on the bottom overlapping that to make it look like it's in the sand somehow. But don't worry about that. We can go in and paint some shadow and more sand later. We want to just try to make sure that this bottom, it doesn't have to be perfectly straight, but for the most part, all filled in. So let's go ahead and load. This is Naples Yellow so that we can give our bamboo fence more of a warm kind of yellow color to it. So I'm going to rinse off my brush and grab my 12 bright brush, so a smaller flat for this. Let's mix a little bit of white into that yellow. That's going to lighten that up. And then let's hold our brush so that we're holding it this way so we make thinner stroke instead of using the full width of the brush. So I'm making very fine kind of lines in there with that lighter color. And I'm just kind of sketching it. You could use the full width of it for some parts. You can do kind of a variety. So maybe in some parts I'm using the full width, and then other parts I'm using the side of the brush to create the thinner width of the brush. So that's going to create some more colored texture in your fence and also give it more kind of a yellowish warm color. So just go in there. The first layer is not dry all the way, so some of this is blending, but I don't want it to over blend and kind of mesh together too much. The top edging of this fence is uneven, so a lot of those strokes were sticking up above that initial line that we drew. That's how we create that kind of texture on the top of the fence, the uneven heights with each of the bamboo sticks. but on the bottom it's relatively straight. I'm just gonna add some more lighter lines in there. And then next, let's go ahead and add some of this shadowy sand that's under our fence. And without rinsing the brush, I grabbed some more of that brown. So there's like every color on my brush now. There's some Naples Yellow, white, and now I grabbed that darker brown that had that black in it. So just a darker color than our sand. And I'm just taking the tip of the brush and creating like little sort of tiny bumps in the sand, just tapping the brush. Some of that overlaps the fence a little bit. So you can take that kind of paint. It's almost like we're the wave technique where I'm taking the tip of the brush and kind of painting kind of curved strokes. So that creates a little bit of sand and darker shadowy area to make it look like that fence is in the sand right there and not floating. So we need our fence to dry before we paint the surfboard, so we can go and paint the other things in this painting. There's a little sailboat that's kind of out in the distance on the water. And so I'm using a number 4 round brush and titanium white. So I'm going to do this very simple. If you want to do more of a colored sail, you can. I just did white sails. So a little kind of curved triangular shape. The top part goes above the horizon line. So it starts in about the middle part of the water area, goes up a little bit above our horizon line. And then there's another triangle on the right side, kind of curves inward. And I'm leaving a little gap in between both of those triangles. And this is Mars Black. I'm going to rinse my 4 round off. I'm going to pinch the bristles here because I'm going to do something small, and sometimes pinching the bristles after you load it in the water help to get those bristles gathered together for your small paint strokes you're going to do. And then a very simple little half circle shape under the sails for the boat. Very, very small, thin, vertical black line. And then we can do reflection. So I'm going to do little tiny horizontal black strokes just under the boat part. Then I'm going to rinse, dry, and pinch the bristles again. And then right here, a little bit of white reflection. So this is just very simple little horizontal lines. So that creates the reflection of the sailboat in the water. So now that our fence has been given time to dry, we can do this step. If yours isn't dry, you can dry it real quick or come back to this step when it is dry. I'm going to use a piece of chalk and I'm going to draw the 3 surfboards. So these are kind of leaning against the fence, or they're just kind of like in the sand. So they're tall, they go above our horizon line. So each of these, the top point of it is a little bit above your horizon, and then it starts a little bit below that fence. So the bottom part of each of the surfboards is kind of flat. We will be painting kind of sand that's buckled up under it. And then I made my surfboard on the right kind of leaning. So you can change that if you want. If you want, you can add more surfboards or just do 1 or 2. When we go to paint these in, you can change the colors and the designs on the boards. You can do little, like your kids' names on the boards, different quotes. So there's lots of customization that can happen with these boards. And next, I'm going to prime them, meaning I'm going to paint them white because most colors that we could potentially paint these, that color is not going to be opaque enough to make this stand out. And also, it's going to allow our color to be super bright because we're painting the first layer white. So this is the 12 bright brush. This is titanium white, and I'm just using the tip of the brush to outline the shape of the board, and then using the full width of the brush to pretty much just paint it in solid. If you still see a little bit of your ocean or fence through that first layer of white, that's okay. This is just a primer that we're adding so that our next color will definitely cover up whatever's still showing through. And even if that second color doesn't cover it up, we can always apply a second coat of whatever that second color is going to be. So pretty much painting all your surfboards white next. If you need to use the round brush to get into some of those small kind of curvy points of the surfboards, you're welcome to change your brush as needed. And I'm going to go silent here and speed the video up just a little bit, but press pause and take your time with filling each of these surfboards in. We're going to need to let these surfboards dry before we can add any color to them. So let's go and paint the palm tree fronds next in this painting. And I'm going to use a 3/8 inch angle brush. This is a brush that comes in the Princeton Velvet Touch brush pack. And it's this brush right here that I'm loading in the water. It's a little angle brush. I don't use an angle brush that often, but this one was helpful for painting these palm trees. And when this is Hooker's Green Hue Permanent, and I'm going to add a teeny tiny bit of black in there because I want to start out dark and then work my way up and make lighter colors after that. So dark green first, load that on the tip of the brush, and I'm going to paint the 2 center lines, just 2 palm tree fronds. So these are 2 lines. So we're starting at the corner, using just the side of the brush and stroking down. And then we're going to do all the little palm leaves. So again, I'm starting in the center of the line, and I'm using just the tip of that angle brush. The nice thing about these angle brushes is you can really get some small detailed lines with the brush. So you can do this, you can use the tip of the brush, but you can also turn the brush kind of on its side and drag it to create some thicker strokes. So you just kind of like start at the center line, just kind of drag outwards. So I did a variety. I did some with like just the tip of the brush to create thinner lines, and then some thicker lines. So it helps to kind of hold your canvas at different angles so you can get in there. So this is all that sort of dark green, but reloading my brush, I might grab like more of just the green and less of the black to create some color variation. Again, we're starting out dark, and then when that first layer dries, we'll add a little bit of lighter color on top, and it's going to dry relatively fast. So then we can do our second palm, and same thing, using just the tip of that brush, starting with that center line, just kind of dragging that brush outwards. Each of those palm leaves are kind of pointed down, kind of curved and going downwards. You might have to overlap the other one that you painted, and that's okay. It's kind of why I did the bottom one first, because I envisioned the top one overlapping the bottom one. We did have to overlap maybe a little bit of that sailboat, but I made sure that I did not overlap it too much. So let's go ahead and rinse, and let's add some lighter colors into our palms. And we can use our titanium white to make that green lighter. So I'm going to green and white on my palette, about equal parts green and white. And if you want to add some of that Naples yellow in there, you can. I did not. I'm just doing green and white. So that's going to make a lighter version of that. And then I'm going to go in there, go back and add lighter color over the darker color. And already I'm going to add some more white into that to lighten it up even more because it's not really showing up right now. It's a little bit more white. So I'm not covering all of my darker pieces. I'm just going over some of it to kind of highlight it and lighten it up. So I did the bottom one, and then I did a few little strokes on the top one, and that'll give you some really pretty variation of colors, so some lighter colors in there that overlap your darker colors. So then we're going to do some greenery kind of all throughout the sand area. There's some grass growing in various areas, and I'm going to still use the angle brush, and I'm still going to use the green that's on my palette. So this is that lighter green that I just used, that white mixed with the green, and I'm just going to do a few little kind of small angled grass blade strokes. This is on the right part of the fence towards the edge. And then I can use some of that darker green as well. So little bunches of little grass kind of growing through the sandy area up against the fence. Some blades are a little bit longer. There's a bunch of grass down here in the lower right. So this is kind of closer. And so these grass pieces are going to be a little bit taller and darker, so I'm using more of the darker color. We can use a little bit of our Naples Yellow to give our grass kind of a more of a yellowish color. A few little pieces down here with that yellowish color. And then some of these longer pieces of grass, we're going to paint the sort of reed seed pieces on the tips of these grasses, and it's kind of blowing to the right. So I just used Naples Yellow and the green, and I'm just making little tiny diagonal lines that kind of sway to the right, using that little part of my angle brush to do this. If you want to use a different brush for this step, you're welcome to. So you're using a combination of your green, your Naples Yellow, a little bit of titanium white. You can do more little grass pieces, kind of overlapping. Over here in the lower left, we have some darker grass pieces. So I'm using mostly the green and the black. I don't want to overlap any part of the surfboards at this point. If I want overlapping, I can paint this, I can overlap at a later step after my surfboards are painted. So I'm just going to be real careful to make sure this grass does not go any higher than my surfboards. But again, just different angles with different variations of your green and your black. Add some more darker pieces over here. Next, I would like to erase the chalk lines of the surfboards. So assuming the white is dry, don't do this if the white is not dry, but I'm going to use a baby wipe to gently erase that chalk so it comes off very easily. And then we're going to load our palette with the colors that we will be painting our surfboards. So this is where you can customize colors. This color right here is deep violet, and I won't load the other colors yet, so we'll do one color at a time. And we can paint, so we're going to paint the surfboard a solid coat of whatever color it's going to be, and then we'll do the design after that dries. So this is 12 Bright Brush. I'm just going to go in with my deep violet and I'm going to paint. So just like how we primed it with the white, we're just going to do the same thing with our color. Use the tip of the brush to outline the shape of your surfboard and then the full width of the brush to fill it in. You want to try to make sure your strokes are going kind of vertical in direction, going in that shape, kind of contours that shape. So tip of the brush to outline, full width of the brush to fill it in solid. And because we primed it with white first, it should be showing up nice and bright. If you're seeing some ocean color or that fence line below the underneath your color, you may need to go back with a second coat of your color. And then before this dries, I'm going to add just a little bit of white to the tip of the brush. Only a teeny bit is needed. And I'm going to use that to kind of highlight and give the color kind of this shiny sort of two-tone look. So I took the white, kind of blended it in with the purple that's already there, stroked kind of downward, so two kind of strokes, curved strokes on the left and the right, and then like a vertical stroke in the middle, and you don't want to over blend it. So my surfboard in the middle, that is primary yellow, but again, you can change the colors of these. So I'm going to rinse 12 bright off, make sure that purple is off of that brush, because that would make my yellow muddy if there was still purple on the brush. So yellow, the middle guy is yellow. Same technique, using the tip of the brush to outline your shape, using the full width to drag it. So yellow's a very translucent color. You may have some see-through ocean color in this. If that happens, I would suggest doing a second coat or adding some white to your brush and letting that white act as a way to make that color more opaque. We'll also be doing that highlight thing again with this board too, with the white, even though it's not going to make this huge of an impact with this yellow because it's already a light color. And then before this dries, we can add our white. So white on the tip of the brush, curve, dragging it down, curve, some vertical strokes in there, and not blending it all the way. Can do a few more because the white's not making that big of an impact because the yellow is already a light color. So let's go ahead and rinse. And my surfboard on the far right, I did with Alizarin Crimson Hue. This is a good painting to use up paint colors that you have, but you don't get to use very often. So same thing. Because this surfboard's going diagonal, I'm still going to make sure my strokes are going diagonally in the direction of the board. So using the tip to outline and the full width of the brush to fill it in solid. And then before this dries, a little bit of white on the tip of the brush, curve, curve, dragging that down, letting it blend gently, but not over blending it. So this first colored layer of the surfboards needs to dry before we can add our designs onto it. We can do our sun. So there's a sun in this painting, upper left part of the sky. I have a number 4 round brush and the primary yellow. So paint a very small circle, and then before this dries, take your finger and smear it outwards. It's going to create a really pretty glow for your sun. And then add a little bit of white to your brush, add a circle, take your finger, smear it outwards. It's going to make your glow brighter. And then when you're done with that, take your white, paint a circle in the center of that. I'm actually going to smear that one too and do like more yellow in the center so that we have our sun. And next I'm going to paint some sparkling little reflections in the water. So I'm going to rinse my brush and pinch the bristles because I'm going to do something small and detailed with this. and it helps to pinch those bristles. I'm going to load white on my brush and way to the edge of the horizon line, so far, far in the distance in the water. A little bit too much water on my bristle, so I had to wipe that off real quick. Sometimes that happens when you don't wipe the brush after loading it, or if you're doing these small details and you don't need a lot of water on your brush for that. But little tiny dash marks way in the distance is going to create that kind of sparkle effect in the water, almost like you're just doing little dots further away. And then there's a few that are kind of closer to the bottom, but to create perspective, you want to make sure the ones that are lower are kind of longer and more spread apart. So that creates that sparkling effect in the water. Once your surfboards have been given the chance to dry, we can go ahead and do our designs. So this is fun. You can look up, Google different surfboard designs and kind of figure out what you're going to do. You can definitely copy mine. It took a while to figure out what I really was going to do. Played around with it a little bit, and this is just kind of what I came up with. This is titanium white. This is the number 4 round brush, and this purple surfboard gets these fun little spiral designs on the left side. So I'm just doing little curvy pieces, little flourishes, 3 at the bottom, and then we can do 2 at the top. So if your designs, if you want to do color on these, I would recommend that you do your layer with white first, and then when the white dries, going back and coloring them in with your different colors. Or make sure that you're using a color that is opaque. Because, so for example, if I wanted to do these little spirals as green, green's a very see-through translucent color, it wouldn't show up as bright versus if I did white first and then green on top. So we can do another little spiral attached to this one. And then I did a little bit of a white outline on the far left of this, even though it didn't really need that. So there is the design for the purple surfboard. For the one in the center, I did some green lines on the outer and inner part of this. So I'm using the Hooker's Green Hue Permanent, mixed a little yellow into it and a little titanium white. Make kind of a pretty spring green yellowish color. And I'm going to paint a border on the inner part of this surfboard. So just a relatively thin line outlining that inner part. And then I'll do a line down the center of that. So adding a little bit more green into that to make it just a tad bit darker. And then a line down the center. And then for the red surfboard, that one we have a line down the center that's going to happen here and some diagonal lines going outwards. So this one's titanium white. And we'll do a central line. And then we'll do little diagonal lines. So these diagonal lines will start out kind of thick on the side and then go thin to kind of a point in the center. So there's two sets of these little triangular pieces on the bottom. And then we have a set of two, or just one set up here, diagonal lines. So if you wanted to add color to this, you can wait for the white to dry and then you can add a color on top of it. I decided to just leave that white. Next, let's go ahead and paint the shadowy parts of the sand, some sand that's kind of buckling up under our surfboard because it's in the sand. So this is the burnt sienna color, and I'm adding some white to it. You basically want to recreate that same sand color, but you want it to be darker so that this shows up. And we're using the 4-round brush, and we're painting like little kind of textured sand pieces that are kind of bunched up and slightly overlapping the bottom parts of our surfboards. That's why we made the bottom part of the surfboards flat, because the little sand piles are going to be overlapping the surfboards. So just be careful if parts of your surfboards are still wet from coloring, painting them in, and the designs. You don't want to mesh too much brown into that. A little kind of curvy, wavy, bunched up strokes. And we're slightly overlapping the bottom parts of the surfboards. And then I'm just going to add more of this sandy texture a little bit further down. So I'm making more strokes. So again, this is darker than that first lighter layer of sand so that it stands out. Little pieces of bunched up sand kind of around the fence area. And then I'm going to do a little bit of water in there to kind of thin this down a little bit. I want to make it slightly lighter, but still enough to kind of show up in this area. Kind of longer strokes in here. So it still shows up, but it's not as dark as what I did just below the surfboards. Longer, kind of more smoother strokes. Need to go around that grass. So that's going to create a little bit more texture in that bottom sandy area. And there's one last detail I'm going to do to the painting in the bamboo fence. I want to create this sort of horizontal line in the fence. So I'm going to use my 12 bright brush for this. Load black just on the tip of the brush to create this thin line. And you can also do this with the round brush or even a paint pen. So I want to just have paint right there on the tip of the bristles so I can create a thin horizontal line. So I'm going to do this part of the fence right here, horizontal line, and then another one on the bottom. So there might be some lines that are showing in between the surfboards, but that is it. This is the conclusion of how to paint Surfboard Beach. Hope you enjoyed this painting. Thanks for watching, and thanks for painting with me.